Fortunately, we still have more work to do, and fortunately, we have some very interesting, exciting speakers to kick off our afternoon. Before I start, I would like to recognize Deputy Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Xia Zhu Kang, who just joined us here in the front row. We welcome you. And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Maura O'Neill, the Chief Innovation Officer and Senior Counselor to the Administrator at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Before coming to USAID, she served as Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as Chief of Staff for U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell. Maura has started 4 companies in the energy, education, and high-tech areas, and was named the Greater Seattle Business Person of the Year in 1989. She has MBAs from both Columbia University and UC Berkeley, and presently serves on the faculty and teaches at Berkeley. We hope our hosts at Stanford don't hold that against her. So thank you, everybody. Give a warm welcome to Dr. Maura O'Neill.
Thanks, Larry. I'm delighted to be here, and it's a particular pleasure for me to be back in the Bay Area because I grew up here when it was apricot and prune orchards. It's changed a little since then, and I also just think it is exciting to have this range, mashup of people and countries for this incredibly important topic. So Rio, 20 years ago, amazing that it's been that long ago, but let's talk about some changes since then. 12 million mobile phones in 1990, almost 5 billion today. 34 new countries that were created, including all of the former Soviet Union, and a new one, South Sudan, that miraculously and gladly had relatively violence-free transition to a new government. So this is a very dynamic change. We also see it in companies. You know, companies thought about corporate social responsibility in the sustainable area because increasingly that was the right thing to do. I remember being at a meeting in 1990. It was the 20th anniversary of what we called in the US Earth Day, and it was corporate America stepping up. But they were stepping up because they felt that they really needed to because their consumers were pressuring them. And now we see this shift on sustainable development from corporate social responsibility in the major corporations to their profit and loss in their P&L. And that's an enormously exciting shift for all of us because it really means that to the heart of the business, they are now thinking about it in sourcing their products, in developing them. And I'll tell you in a minute why that isn't just out of the goodness of their hearts that they're interested in doing that, because there's a very powerful economic objective that's going on. The other thing we see is the consumer products forum. These are the big, giant retailers and manufacturers, the Unilevers, the Walmarts, the Coca-Colas. They stood up and said, you know what? A lot of trees getting cut down in this world, and that's bad for a lot of reasons. And we, as some of the leading captains of industry, are going to commit to zero net deforestation. That is, we are no longer in a net way going to source our products in virgin forests in the world as of 2020. That is an amazing thing. And now there says, okay, we made this promise, but we are very worried about whether there's enough supply on a sustainable basis to provide. And so I think that's where we all come in. They've stepped up to create the demand. Now we have to help them create the sustainable supply chains in order for that to happen. But it hasn't been all so rosy. We are challenged by the fact that there are now 2 billion more people that have joined us and joined our family, our human family in the last, since 1990. We also have cut down about 73 million hectares of primary forest land. That's about 2 Californians, so that's a lot. in the world. And sadly, we're still increasing that from about 4 million hectares a year to about 6.4. So it's going in the wrong direction. And so we're particularly pleased that the consumer products people have stepped up, and even in lieu of not knowing exactly where the sustainable supply chain is going to come from, says that we're really committed to being part of that solution. So the meeting today and tomorrow about connective technologies is exciting to see, and it was exciting to see all that speed geeking last night. I just thought it was, I'm just always in awe of the amazing things and ideas and traction that people are getting. So I hope that was your takeaway as well. This talk today for a few minutes, this conversation we're going to have, and I'll leave some time for questions and answers. And I came from this area, so I'm as candid as the day is long. So if you want to object to something I said, you have a different point of view, or you have a different stat that you want to use, or you want to support something, that's the kind of conversation I want to have with you today. But let me put science and technology and innovation in some sort of historic perspective. So economists have looked at this, and they said, how much does science, technology, and innovation really matter in a growing economy? And they said that their estimates shows that it accounts for about 85% of all GDP growth over the last few decades. Sorry, 50% of all GDP growth in the last few decades, and 85% of the increase in per capita income. So if we care about lifting more people out of poverty, if we care about having people realize their full potential, we care about science and technology and innovation, and we know that it is part and parcel a key to this. Going forward, and remember I told you why these large companies potentially were quite interested in sustainable supply chains in the developing world. And that is HBSC, a global bank, has done a bunch of analysis, and they said not only was it true that science and technology mattered in the past, they've also told us that 2/3 of all economic growth, not incremental growth, all economic growth in the next 40 years will come from the emerging nations. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to join hands with our different attributes in order to do that. But that economic growth is not going to happen if we don't have stable governments, if we don't have adequate infrastructure in energy, in water, and in broadband, and if the consumers of tomorrow and the people, indigenous people, are ravaged by disease. There's no one country or one company or one NGO that can possibly solve that and make that future happen. And so what's really terrific today is to think about what each and every one of us are best in world, best in class at. In fact, I guess Tim O'Reilly called it distributed micro expertise this morning, and that's what we have to be great at, is those kinds of connections, so that 1 + 1 can really make 5, and that's why we're here today, and that's what's important. USAID is making a shift and has begun under Administrator Shaw to reimagine itself, and we launched a reform effort called USAID Forward. It has a couple principles that are really key to this meeting today. Not only does it embrace science and technology explicitly and make it part of our policy and budget, but it also believes fundamentally in local procurement and in host country systems. And so we encourage you and ask you to work with us to help us make those shifts, to use the institutions in your country, to use local entrepreneurs and NGOs so that you can build the capability so that, as President Obama in the first policy directive in development, which he made last a little over a year ago, said, let us all imagine a time where AID is no longer necessary. And that's going to happen with host countries and local companies and local civil society and NGOs having the tools and capability for which connective technologies can play such a key in doing that. So I hope that you will help us in doing that. We also have a terrific science and technology new group at AID, and they have said, you know, all great ideas don't just come from the US. I know you knew that, we know that. And so, but they don't come from researchers. But we have a National Science Foundation that has built an incredible science infrastructure in the US. So our science and technology people did a deal with NSF, and they created what's called the PEER program, so that we can fund the scientists overseas that can collaborate with US scientists and work to tackle some of the problems, because we know that that's key as well. In addition, we believe that there's an opportunity to incubate, to set up incubation centers at universities to begin to do this, and so there'll be a request for proposal out to try and get a set of universities to really step up and say, they want to be part of this incubation infrastructure for development. But just as in the past, science and technology played a big role, we know that connective technologies will. So now I want to take you on a trip for a minute. So I want to take you away from Palo Alto in this beautiful, gorgeous day, and I want to imagine yourself in Afghanistan. So, but, you know, I'm going to put you in a nice neighborhood. And so this neighborhood, Wazir Akbar Khan, is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Kabul. The people who live there are governors, captains of industry, and the world's diplomats. But in every other sense, it is miles away from Palo Alto. The streets are unpaved. There's wide gutters carrying raw sewage, and stacks of trash pile up in alleyways. Buildings are run down, they're half finished, but guess what? They're not as different as you and I. I grew up, one of my favorite things to do was to fly kites around here, and of course then I would get caught on an overhead electric and thing, and it would break, and so then we would get our bikes and go and climb up and try to not get electrocuted while we pulled it out. Well, in your neighborhood in Kabul, there's kids flying kites too, and they're talking about and caring about a lot of the things that you and your kids and my kids care about as well. So in September of 2010, they had a key election in Afghanistan, and big amount of people voted. And there was a postdoc student from UC San Diego who went there, and he was in that neighborhood. He was watching how that voting went. The votes happened on the prayer rug. The election poll center person put out the votes, and he has announced one for this person, one for that. It was like a football game in the US. There was cheering going on for whether your candidate was getting one or not. And then at the end of it, he took a picture of the tally and said, I'm going to take a picture of this tally. There was actually 450 people like Mike who were in randomized polling centers across Afghanistan at that day. And about half of them told the poll manager, you know what, I'm going to take a picture of that poll tally, and we're going to compare it a couple weeks from now from what the roundup is, and we'll see if those two compare. So fast forward, that happens. Anybody have a sense of what the difference was, about how often it made a difference if I told you that I was going to take a picture? Anybody have any guesses? Anybody have any guesses? How many? 80%. So you thought 80% of the time it would reduce. Well, you're pretty darn close. It was actually 60%. So 60% of the time it actually made a difference. And what's the order of magnitude? Do you think it made a few votes difference, or sort of a lot of votes difference? How many votes did you think it made, percentage-wise? 30%. You get a gold star, it's 25%. So here, this wasn't meant to actually eliminate all election fraud, but again, as somebody who tries to work on corruption will tell you, we want to make corruption and election fraud more and more expensive, more and more difficult to do. So this was a technique. Fairly simple. Mobile phones have been around for a long time, but there was an innovative way, a process innovation to making this happen. UCSD cobbled a little money together. They worked with Ugandans, and in that following February, a year ago, they did it in Uganda. And of course, the question for any of our innovations that we work on and that you work on is, can you replicate it again? And can it scale? Because that's what really matters to move the needle in some significant way. And so what happened in Uganda was 50% reduction in election fraud, and somewhere around 25–35% was the delta of how much the favorite son or daughter, in most cases it was the son, who was getting the votes. Now Qualcomm, a San Diego company, has decided, who's a manufacturer, as you know, of the stuff that goes into cell phones, has decided to take this and scale it to much of the emerging world. This was a program that was developed and financed through, they were financed in Afghanistan by a new technique that we're using called the Development Innovation Ventures Program at USAID. As I told you, we believe great ideas come from all different places, and yet we need to seed them, much like this valley is very famous for, and then begin to see evidence and then figure out who can scale it. We were particularly thrilled that this scaled in the private sector without our interventions. And I would encourage all of us to look at that kind of systematic innovation to really do this. And we're really excited about their ability to do that. This is a space, I think, where development agencies and companies and host country governments can really do. We're really proud at USAID to have been on the ground floor of helping the Green Revolution in Asia. It produces, on average, the estimates show economic growth of about $4.5 billion a year as a result, and obviously has saved millions of lives from starvation. We did it again with oral rehydration therapy. Costs about $6 per person, and it's estimating to save about $2 million per year. We know that there's those kind of ideas sitting in this room today and sitting in your countries, and we have to figure out whether you scale it through the public sector or scale it through the private sector, how to identify those, how to vet them, how to scale them. And as people like the Lemonson Foundation are doing, is they're trying to even create the invention ecosystem to make sure that that whole thing starts to begin with. And we think that ecosystem of innovation that starts with the entrepreneur, that starts with the inventor, and then we participate in nurturing and scaling that is really critical to realize the promise of science and technology. So I told you a little bit about some ideas about good governance in this election fraud. Let me switch to a minute and talk about infrastructure. I said we wouldn't realize the promise of this tremendous economic growth and this tremendous lift of people out of desperate poverty and disease if we didn't pay attention to good governance, infrastructure, and not being ravaged by disease. So I have a friend who I met a number of years ago who's one of the first people at Google. His name is Lal Atesh. He grew up in India. He went and got his PhD in robotics at Carnegie Mellon, really one of those really smart folks that I only understand half the conversation when I talk to him. And Larry and Sergey, the founders of Google, met him fairly early on. Turns out he repurposed the intelligence that he had built into the robots to help optimize Google's search engine right away. So again, here you're taking somebody who did robots and they repurposed it for how to juice and make more effective a search engine. So fast forward, they ask him to open the first operations in Google in India. He does that, but he's not really an engineer. He's a brilliant engineer. He's not really a manager. He doesn't aspire to become the CFO or the CTO. He's just a world-class inventor. So he looks around and he says, you know, one of the big connective technology problems we have is mapping. Out of the 6 or 7 billion people we have around, we only have about 1 billion that can go on Google Maps and do it around. If we did it the old-fashioned way, it would take us decades to map the world, and it would take us billions of dollars. And so what he did was, with a group of 40 volunteers from Google, he put in place a new product called MapMaker. Many of you may have seen it. And he put it up on the web, and he basically crowdsourced maps from around the world. So he said, you live in that neighborhood, you know what streets there are, and you know how to get along. And so everybody maps. So now, within 4 years, we have another 1 billion people mapped, and that will accelerate. So you say, well, that's nice, Maura. I like those Mapbox people. You can attach those data sets. That's pretty exciting, but really maps. I mean, you know, how important can that be? So let me tell you the impact it's already had. Pakistan had one of the most devastating floods that the world has seen, at least in our lifetime. 20 million people affected. Not many maps in Pakistan. So they called up Google and they said, hey, we heard you had some maps. Could you help us with figuring out, because we have millions of people, we don't even know where they are. So Lalatesh and his team shipped over the maps, told them where it was. The Pakistan government believes that those maps allowed them to locate 800,000 people and save 250,000 lives. Yeah. Just amazing. So we believe that that's the kind of thing. There's also a woman in Pakistan who runs an NGO, and what we know about saving moms at birth, saving moms' lives when they're having kids, is the most important thing, indicator of whether that mom dies or that mom lives, is whether there's an attendant at birth if she gets in trouble. She often doesn't know she's going to get in trouble early on, and that's a story for another day, for which we're working on some tools. But so she started this NGO in Pakistan, said, call us, text us, tell us if you're in trouble. We'll come pick you up and bring you to a medical clinic or to a hospital. Only the problem was there was no maps. So she used to lose women. They would die all the time, because she never got to pick them up, because the person that went to pick them up got lost. She met Lalatesh's boss the other day and said, you know what, whoever developed that tool, they're really God. And so his boss said, well, let me introduce you to God. Here he is. And she says, once that tool was involved, we can now quickly find those moms and get them help. So whether it's disaster victims or whether moms that are in crisis during a pregnancy, it's the kind of thing that connective technologies can really do to create a different and better future for all of us. And that's the kind of stuff that we ought to imagine as individuals and groups, and we ought to do. I told you a little bit about ravaged by disease. I told you about moms dying at birth. At USAID, along with our partners, we're really excited about a Grand Challenges program. We announced one on saving lives at birth because, sadly, the 2 Millennium Development Goals that we are not doing well as a world is in reducing the amount of moms that are dying and reducing the amount of kids that are dying at birth. And so this says, let's get together as a world and challenge ourselves to come up with new ways to reduce that. And that's what we're working on. And we expect to have more grand challenges. We announced one on all children reading, and stay tuned, and we'd love to partner with you in your country or in the world to do this. So I guess today I'll end the conversation where we started, which is that there is a promise of having everyone in this world have the healthy, vibrant life that probably you and I have had the opportunity to enjoy. And that will require game-changing innovations, science and technology breakthroughs that scale, and the cooperation and the commitment to scale those very quickly. And for us to be clear what we're really best at class on and who it is that we need to bring into the fold, because they're best at class is something we don't do, so that we can scale. So again, I really appreciate the honor to participate in this and to have this conversation. So now it's your turn to talk. Thank you very much.
I think we'll because we're running a little late, maybe take one question from the audience. This gentleman down here, is there a microphone for him, please?
Take two and then we can
Okay,
answer both
two
of them.
quick questions and then she'll answer both.
Thank you. My name is Burton Lee. I'm from Stanford Mechanical Engineering Department. I liked your talk, a lot of the examples. You keep coming back to the importance of engineering and science. What I don't see is USAID engaging seriously with U.S. and overseas engineering and medical schools. I don't see you bringing in veteran engineering and scientific talent into your workforce in Washington, D.C. as part of your headquarters operation. When can we expect to see USAID delegations visiting MIT, Stanford, not the business schools or the economics departments, but the engineering schools?
Okay, thanks. I'm not punting. I'm just getting two questions real quickly. How about if we get one here, and then I'll answer both of those.
Thank you very much for the extra time for me to speak. My name is Venancio Musingi, the Minister of Science and Technology of Mozambique. I want to congratulate you, Maura, for the excellent presentation, but also to the fact that President Obama has established the Chief Innovation Officer. I think that was a good breakthrough, and I hope this will be an entry point also of our relationship in the issue of innovation. You said USAID is on the shift mode toward establishing more active cooperation in the area of science, technology, and innovation. The question I have is, what will be the procedures? Is USAID going to listen to the national science, technology policies and the strategies that we have, or it will bring its agenda that is previously designed and we have to fit into it? And this answer would, in part, help us to see what kind of collaboration we can do with the research institutions for establishing facilities in our country for innovation. You said also that there is a big number of innovation centers with which we can collaborate. And I think one of the big problems we have is that cooperation between North and South, or developed world and developing, is that we go by small scale. The preference is always to finance $2,000 or $10,000, not big projects that will have an impact, like infrastructure that can support the research that we want to do and innovation. Is any thinking on shifting this strategy? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let me see if I can take both of these. And I know there's like 4 questions there, so I'll just pick 1 or 2 of them. And it isn't that I won't talk to you after about the others. I'm just trying to be respectful of the time. So first of all, on the what about mechanical, electrical, engineering, more technical disciplines? So first of all, that was a huge gap in USAID's staff over the last decade or 2. And so this administrator made it an extremely high priority. We've gone from 3 AAAS fellows to, Dave, do we have about 48 or something? Yeah, 48 now. And so we're trying to rebuild at all levels. We're trying to do position descriptions that will attract more technical people with the kinds of skills you're talking about into our foreign service. So that's one. The second thing is we have, clearly we obviously maybe haven't been to the mechanical engineering department at Stanford, and that's an oversight. I say that with all. But we have developed great inroads with MIT's engineering, with Berkeley's engineering, and with others. And I encourage you to look at this, that we are looking to set up these formal relationships over the next 6 months with a handful of universities in the US to do exactly what you're talking about. So I'd say we've recognized it's a problem, it's a work in progress, come help us think through and solve it in a way. So to your question from Mozambique, I appreciate it. I think the major shift in USAID forward is actually from one where we show up with the tablets and tell you what our analysis has said you should do, to one of just the opposite. We hope that what we are now shifting to is to be deep listeners and to really understand what your hopes and dreams in your country is, and then think about our bags of tools and assets to try and figure out how to do that. So call us out if we're not doing that well enough, but that's really the shift that we're having happen now at the government level, at the NGO level, and at the for-profit company level. That too will be a work in progress, so I don't mean that we won't stub our toe or you won't be able to say, here's an example of where you didn't live up to that promise. Just help us emerge to get there. So I think before I get the hook, I'll stop there. And I hope that we'll continue this conversation over the rest of the day. And thank you so much today, and thank you so much for all you're doing to make this a better place in which to raise our kids and create the connections that are so desperately needed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maura. Now we're going to move into our last panel for the day, and it's quite an outstanding one. This is on developing country perspective.